Right, so for months, Israel's government has repeated a simple, convenient narrative to justify its suffocating siege on Gaza. Hamas is stealing the humanitarian aid. This allegation, repeated by Western politicians, military spokespeople, amplified by a largely compliant mainstream media, of course, has served as a cornerstone of Israel's argument for maintaining tight border restrictions, strict inspection regimes, and for funneling aid exclusively through the controversial Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, the GHF, where turning up for food aid often turns out to be fatal. According to this narrative, Gaza's humanitarian catastrophe, marked by all those haunting images we see day after day of skeletal children, hospitals running out of food, and people searching through refuse looking for scraps, is not the result of Israeli policy, but of Hamas diverting supplies for its own nefarious uses. Well, that narrative has now completely collapsed, as Israel's lies inevitably always do. The release of a comprehensive USAID report has dealt a devastating blow to Israel's claims, confirming that there is no evidence of systematic Hamas theft of humanitarian aid. This finding has not come from activists or adversaries of Israel, nor from international organizations that Israel routinely accuses of bias. It has come from the United States' own official aid agency, an institution that is deeply integrated into American foreign policy and has worked in close cooperation with Israeli authorities to track aid deliveries. So this revelation leaves Israel with no credible justification for its starvation siege. It's been found out. So what next then? Right, so the humanitarian reality in Gaza reinforces the gravity of this finding by USAID. It has largely exposed what many of us already knew to be true, really, doesn't it? That the Israeli claims were just cover for their own barbarity all this time, and as so often proves to be the case, they've been found out for that. Médecins Sans Frontières, the MSF, has reported that severe malnutrition in children under 5 has tripled in just the last 2 weeks, while Quds News has documented the rising number of starvation-related child deaths, including a recent case of yet another infant succumbing to hunger amid what Palestinian authorities are explicitly describing as an Israeli-made famine. Itamar Ben-Gvir, Israel's rancid far-right national security minister, has dismissed all of these reports, as many Israeli officials have, arrogantly claiming there is no hunger in Gaza, even as over 100 aid organizations have warned of an escalating famine. With the USAID findings now public, these dismissals appear not just callous, but criminally negligent. As such, Israel no longer has any legitimate leg to stand on. The siege is revealed as a deliberate policy of collective punishment and starvation, and even Israel's closest ally in the US has now confirmed that. When Israel launched its genocide on Gaza back in October 2023, its intentions regarding the treatment of the civilian population were made abundantly and readily clear. The then Defence Minister Yoav Gallant openly declared that we are imposing a complete siege. No electricity, no food, no water. Everything is closed. UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer made it clear Israel does have that right. He's never apologised for saying it either. This was not a defensive military necessity, nor an unintended consequence of conflict. It was a deliberate strategy. The policy was designed to collectively punish the entire population of Gaza, a crime under international law, as we should all know by now, don't we? And Gallant's words amounted to a direct confession. He can hardly complain that he has an ICC arrest warrant out for him now as such. Yet as international outrage over the humanitarian situation grew, Israel shifted its messaging. It began to frame its siege not as an act of deliberate starvation, but as a necessary security measure. Officials claimed that Hamas routinely diverted food and medical supplies, repurposing them for military operations or selling them on the black market to fund weapons, the fiends. This narrative, repeated in countless briefings, echoed by Israeli allies, all became the public justification for severe border restrictions and lengthy inspection delays that often rendered food deliveries inedible by the time they entered Gaza, if they entered at all, and weren't just left to rot outside the gates. Western governments, unwilling to confront Israel, too in hock with them, as the case may be, embraced this narrative with very little scepticism. US State Department spokespeople and UK Foreign Office officials referred repeatedly to diversion concerns, and European leaders justified their reluctance to push Israel harder by parroting the same line. It was, in diplomatic terms, a convenient fig leaf. If Hamas was stealing aid, then the responsibility for hunger in Gaza could be shifted away from Israel and onto its enemies. Well, this propaganda strategy is nothing new, really, is it? Israel has a long history of accusing Palestinian authorities and institutions of corruption and aid diversion to undermine their credibility. UNRWA, for example, is probably the best example in recent times, recent months, has been subject to repeated smear campaigns, most of which collapsed under scrutiny, but it didn't stop many governments withdrawing funding and nearly seeing the organisation collapse. Yet the Hamas theft narrative served a dual purpose. It delegitimized the governing authority in Gaza, as Hamas are, regardless of how they are categorized or how they are prescribed or how they are viewed by various nations of the world, but whilst also providing a moral cover for policies that otherwise amounted to collective punishment. So the USAID report released this week is a bombshell, precisely because it comes from Israel's most powerful ally. USAID is not a neutral humanitarian organisation, it's an official US agency. It is closely aligned with US foreign policy and operating in cooperation with Israeli security authorities. Its findings, therefore, in this matter carry enormous weight because it flies in the face of everything we've been told to believe. After reviewing 156 reported incidents of aid diversion between October of 2023 and May of this year, USAID concluded there was no evidence of systematic Hamas theft of US-funded aid. Of the documented incidents, 44 were linked directly or indirectly to Israeli actions, including military seizures of aid convoys, redirection of supplies to areas under Israeli control, and long inspection delays that caused food spoilage. The remaining incidents were attributed to criminal gangs and logistical failures, some of which at least are known to be funded and protected by Israel as well. So while the report includes a standard bureaucratic disclaimer that it cannot rule out isolated incidents that do involve Hamas, this is merely cautious language rather than anything they have evidence for. Had there been any credible proof, any evidence of Hamas systematically diverting aid, they'd have been all over it. USAID would have been all over it, wouldn't they? So this finding is devastating to Israel's narrative because USAID is not a body Israel can easily dismiss as biased. Unlike UNRWA or the World Food Programme, which Israel routinely accuses of anti-Semitism or Hamas infiltration, USAID is an agency of Israel's closest strategic ally. When even Washington's own aid monitors contradict Israeli claims, the credibility of those claims collapses entirely. As France 24 reported in its coverage of the report, this revelation undermines not just Israeli talking points, but also the diplomatic cover Western governments have used to justify inaction. The USAID findings are consistent with what UN agencies and humanitarian groups have been saying for months. The World Food Programme, UNRWA, the OCHA, they've all reported that the primary causes of hunger in Gaza are Israeli restrictions on border crossings, military attacks on civilians collecting food, and the destruction of agricultural infrastructure. The USAID report confirms that starvation in Gaza is not a consequence of aid theft, but of deliberate policy choices. But if Hamas is not stealing aid, who is responsible for the diversion incidents that have occurred? Increasingly, evidence points to criminal gangs operating under Israeli watch, particularly the militia led by Yasser Abu Shabab, who the Wall Street Journal, incidentally, just the other day, literally allowed to write an article for them. Abu Shabab is a former drug trafficker who escaped prison in 2023 and now leads the so-called Popular Forces, a group accused of looting humanitarian convoys. The infamous December 2024 raid on a UN aid convoy at Kerem Shalom, in which 98 out of 109 trucks were seized, has been widely attributed to his group. UN officials and aid workers have repeatedly observed that these gangs operate openly, within sight of Israeli forces, often approaching convoys unhindered. In some cases, they appear to receive tacit approval or even direct support from Israeli authorities. According to investigative reporting and statements from UN staffers, there is credible evidence that Abu Shabab's group has been armed by Israel for security coordination in certain areas. Whether or not these arms were explicitly intended for aid theft, the reality is that these gangs have been allowed to operate on Israel's watch with impunity. And this revelation is particularly damning because it flips Israel's narrative on its head. Not only is Hamas not responsible for widespread aid theft, as the USAID report has implied, has shown, but the only significant theft documented has occurred under Israeli watch. By tolerating or enabling these gangs, Israel has effectively outsourced the chaos of starvation to criminal proxies, further exacerbating the humanitarian crisis whilst blaming its enemies. With the Hamas theft narrative dismantled, Israel's siege is exposed for what it has always been, though, a deliberate act of collective punishment. The Gazan government has explicitly described the famine as imposed by Israel, demanding immediate international intervention, which never seems to come. Iranian officials have gone further, accusing Israel of premeditated starvation, a claim that now carries weight in light of the USAID findings. Even Israeli officials have at times tacitly admitted to this reality. Gallant's early siege declaration and Ben-Gvir's arrogant denial of Gaza's hunger crisis are not defensive statements, they're confessions. Israel is not merely failing to prevent famine, it's actively causing it. Under international law, the use of starvation as a weapon of war is a war crime, and when carried out on a scale designed to destroy a population, it constitutes a genocide. The Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, which Israel claimed would streamline aid delivery, has instead become a death trap, with numerous reports of civilians being killed while queuing for food. Starvation in Gaza is not an accident of war. It is a deliberate strategy. The legal implications of the USAID report, therefore, are profound. Starvation of civilians as a method of warfare is explicitly prohibited under Article 8 of the Rome Statute, and the International Court of Justice has already accepted South Africa's genocide case against Israel as plausible. The USAID findings provide further evidence that starvation in Gaza is intentional, strengthening both ICJ and ICC investigations. Diplomatically, the report places Israel's allies in an uncomfortable and rather awkward position, which frankly they deserve to be in. The US, the UK, the EU have all used the Hamas theft narrative to justify their failure to impose sanctions or arms embargoes. Now, with that narrative publicly contradicted by Washington's own aid agency, their continued inaction risks being seen not just as moral cowardice, but as complicity. For countries already critical of Israel, like Spain, Ireland, Norway, South Africa, this report's a powerful tool for increasing pressure on Israel in international forums. This revelation is a public relations disaster for Israel. Its image as a state acting out of security concerns rather than malice has just been totally destroyed. Global public opinion, already shifting against Israel due to reports of mass civilian casualties and widespread destruction — we have been witnessing this for 21 months now after all — will be further outraged by the confirmation that starvation is a deliberate policy. We already knew it, if we're being honest, didn't we? But now it's there in black and white. For pro-Israel lobby groups and Western politicians, defending Israel's actions has just become significantly harder. But this is not just about public relations. The USAID report undermines the entire propaganda apparatus that Israel has relied upon for decades. Its credibility on humanitarian issues has collapsed, and even its closest allies can no longer deny the truth. Hasbara your way out of this one if you can. The USAID report is not just another piece of evidence in the ongoing debate over Gaza, it is a decisive turning point as well. Israel's central justification for its starvation siege, the claim that Hamas is stealing aid, has just been publicly discredited by the US's own aid agency. What remains is the undeniable reality, therefore, that Israel is deliberately starving civilians as part of a strategy of collective punishment. It is no longer deniable, it is fact. Israel no longer has any legitimate excuse for its actions. Its narrative has collapsed, its propaganda exposed, and its closest ally is the one that has done it, inadvertently confirming what human rights organisations and Palestinians and so many of the rest of us appalled observers have been saying for months. The question now is no longer whether Israel is guilty, but whether the international community will do something about it. And I don't mean dropping aid from the skies in the hopes Palestinians get to it before the IDF does either, because that, as news has been going around a lot of today, is just pure optics and nothing meaningful at all. Will Western governments continue to provide political cover and arms shipments, or will they finally confront the reality that they are enabling mass starvation and do something meaningful about it? Because history will not forgive any further silence. The children of Gaza are not dying because of Hamas. They are dying because Israel has chosen to starve them. And the world, armed with undeniable evidence, now faces a choice to either act to stop it or continue to be complicit in one of the most shameful episodes of our time. Well, some people who refuse to be complicit in what Israel are doing in Gaza and their imposed starvation are the good people of the island of Syros, a popular holiday destination in Greece, not least with Israeli cruise ships as it happens. Well, the latest one got driven off to Cyprus instead because the people there are not willing to share their island with people from a genocidal state who think they get to enjoy a holiday whilst their government starves an entire population. Get all the details of that powerful story in this video recommendation here as your suggested next watch. Please do also hit like, share and subscribe if you haven't done so already, so as to ensure you don't miss out on all new daily content, as well as spreading the word and helping to support the channel at the very same time, which is very much appreciated, holding power to account for ordinary working class people. And I'll hopefully catch you on the next vid. Cheers, folks.